It's mid-November, 1809. In an alliance of last resort, the Chinese and Portuguese navies have come together to take down the most formidable confederation of pirates the world had ever seen. The Portuguese at this point have blockaded a fleet of pirate ships in the narrow Humen Strait along the Pearl River Delta, not far from present-day Hong Kong. Their targets? Pirate Confederation leader Zheng Shi and her second-in-command, military strategist, adopted son, and lover. Yeah, it's a little weird what little we know of this woman, but all the same, this is the fascinating story of hands down the most successful pirate of all time. Hi everyone. I decided to start a new series of videos in order to share stories about the subjects featured in some of my art. These new episodes are called Chinese History Legendary Figure Painting because what I realized is that as I go through the research process and find reference materials, I always stumble on something fascinating about the person or the time period that gets me really excited about painting, and it really triggers some of the creative process. So I hope that these videos help you understand a little bit of background about what I'm working on as well. As is probably always going to be the case, the story that I'm going to share with you today is a mix of fact and fiction and folklore because very little concrete information is known about the pirate queen Zheng Shi. So first, let's just take a look at the time period. Now, most of the photographs that are featured in this video were taken in the late 1800s, some 50 to 60 years after Zheng Shi had already retired. But hopefully they do give us a sense of what life might have been like during the Qing dynasty and the years in which she would have lived after she gave up her piratical career. So Zheng Shi came from the lowest rungs of society. Even though Canton was home to some of the most rich and powerful members of Chinese society, it was also home to some of the most desperate and destitute. As the only port through which almost all foreign countries were allowed to trade at the time, Canton, all the towns along the Pearl River, thrived with merchants, traders, warehouse owners, and government officials. But the wealth gap between those that have and those that do not was incredibly immense. Floating slums made up of boats strung together became the home for fishermen, prostitutes, and other lower class citizens. And they were more commonly known as simply boat people because they rarely lived on land. And this is where historians really first find any record about Zheng Shi. Sometime in the late 1790s, Zheng Shi was working as a prostitute in a floating brothel known at the time as flower boats. And they probably looked not unlike this one pictured here. The prostitution industry at this point was highly developed in southern China. At the time, daughters were really considered liabilities for most families. You feed your daughter, you clothe her, you raise her, you marry her off, they take a dowry with them, and then you basically just never see your daughters again. They become members of an entirely different household, and they work for them, they pray for them after they die. So it was not uncommon at the time for daughters of poorer families to be sold to richer households to work as servants, or, as was probably Zheng Shi's case, sold to brothels. So you're probably wondering how a prostitute becomes a commander of a pirate confederation. Well, Zheng Shi managed to catch the eye of an infamous pirate at the time who was then the commander of the Red Flag Fleet and the Pirate Coalition, and his name was Zheng Yi. He came from a long line of pirates, as piracy back then was a family affair, not unlike, the mafia. But he really set himself apart by turning a world of, ragtag competing pirate boats that were constantly at risk of killing each other off into a well-oiled military coalition with himself at the top. So historians aren't really sure if Zheng Yi was simply infatuated with this woman or whether he married her because he knew she had a genius for business and trade, but in the end, the marriage was rumored to have become a full partnership, as Zheng Shi refused to marry the pirate unless he gave her 50% control and stake in all of his operations. So let's just do a recap here. We have a young prostitute who, one, not only receives an offer of marriage from an infamous pirate who actually could have just taken whatever he wanted to. Two, she demands half his empire. And three, he actually agrees. The couple married in 1801, but 6 years later, Zheng Yi apparently died, having drowned in a tsunami, leaving the commanding position for over this pirate confederation up for grabs. The most logical successor would have been Zheng Yi's adopted son, Zhang Baozi, who he had groomed from an illiterate fisherman to become a well-liked, charismatic, and effective pirate leader in his own right. But this prospect didn't go over well with Zheng Shi, his widow. She manages to secure not only Zhang Baozi's vote for herself to become the next leader of the pirate confederation, the two of them become lovers as well. Once members of Zheng Yi's extended pirate family ended up supporting his widow, as the next leader, the other fleets basically just had to fall in line behind her. I think it's hard for someone like me in the modern era to understand how it was possible for a woman to have amassed this much power among a group of predominantly male outlaws. But this is the surprising thing about looking back in time and seeing such an example of incredible female leadership. At the time that Zheng Shi was operating during the Qing dynasty, it was highly uncommon for women to take an active role in society. This was the era in which foot binding was everyday practice for any family in polite society. Daughters were married off at a very young age. And Confucianism, as the dominating social philosophy, relegated women to just like this tiny, tiny supporting role in family life. And women just really couldn't do much at all. But among the margins of Chinese society, where people had to struggle to survive, you realize that foot binding was a luxury that most families couldn't afford. This is a photo of a boatwoman during the Qing dynasty, and just compare her with a lady of the same time period. Women at the bottom rungs of everyday life were expected to work, and it was no different whether you lived on a fishing boat, a flower boat, or a pirate ship. And Zheng Shi had proven herself as a shrewd businesswoman and an effective leader as Zheng Yi's wife, and now with her adopted son slash lover slash second in command supporting her, there really was just no stopping her. But still, she had her work cut out for her. I mean, she had to control anywhere from 20,000 to 80,000 pirates and coordinate the operations of 300 to 1,000 junks in a fair and organized manner. And so just to give you a Western reference point, the infamous Blackbeard pirate who commanded 300 pirates and a few ships, Zheng Shi's scale was just so big. She had some pretty big shoes to fill. But one of the things that she did first was enact a very strict code of laws. Everyone was subject to them, no exceptions, and the cost of breaking the code was almost always punishable by death, cutting off the offender's head and throwing his body into the ocean. So here's just some examples of what the code included. A ship's loot must be registered with the entire fleet. A ship takes a 20% cut, with the remaining going into a collective fund. Any pirate giving his own orders without permission or disobeying a superior order was beheaded on the spot. The code also protected women in particular, which was interesting. If a pirate raped a female captive, he'd be beheaded. If he had consensual sex with a female captive, then both parties would be beheaded. What's more is that marriage was actually allowed among the pirates. They could marry with permission, but the pirate was required to be faithful to his wife and had to honor his wife accordingly. So under Zheng Shi's rule, the fleet flourished in really the most sinister way possible. Even though Zheng Shi, now looking back, may be remembered as somewhat of a lovable villain or a folk hero, it's important to remember that she and her men were still a bunch of ruthless pirates who terrorized not just the rich, but also just everyday people, fishermen, villagers trying to make a living. The pirates not only extorted protection money from the imperial government and also foreign trading ships. They demanded it from towns, and if anybody resisted, they would raze it. They would burn everything to the ground. They would spare no one, man, woman, or child. They would kill them by the thousand sometimes. There's this one particularly grisly story about pirates that cut off the villagers' heads and hung them on a banyan tree, like some creepy Christmas tree, as a warning to others. And, they would set people on fire, and it was terrible. The only way that you could save yourself from their violence was just to pay up. So, with the situation being this bad for most cities along the Pearl River, the Chinese, Portuguese, and British navies all made several attempts to stop Zheng Shi, both coordinated and separately, but their campaigns just met with limited success. The Pirate Confederation would regularly thwart any plans to stop them, and it wasn't until a combination of more modern naval technology from the Portuguese, bad weather, and Confederation infighting that hinted to Zheng Shi that her star was finally waning. Which leads us to the beginning of this story, where we started, where Portuguese and Chinese naval forces have Zheng Shi and Zhang Baozi's Red Flag fleet cornered in the Humen Strait in November of 1809. If you consult Chinese imperial records or Portuguese records, they bombarded the pirate ships and sank dozens of junks and killed more than 1,000 pirates. But according to an English merchant officer named Richard Glasspool, who was actually on board with the Red Flag fleet as Zheng Shi's captive at the time, and he was awaiting ransom, he said that not a single pirate vessel was destroyed. The Navy had even sent these burning fireboats loaded with explosives into the bay in order to set fire to this trapped flotilla of pirate junks. But the pirates were actually able to divert them all to shore, put out the fires, and requisition the boats for their own uses. And in the end, the wind actually shifted in the favor of the pirates. These same fireboats that were sent in their direction returned to the Portuguese and ended up harming the Navy instead, and allowed the pirates to get away. Nevertheless, it was overly apparent that Chinese ships at this point were completely outgunned by foreign ships, which was an advantage that the British would ultimately exploit during the Opium Wars not long afterwards. Not only that, the Pirate Confederation seemed to just be getting too large for a single commander to maintain absolute control. It's said that the Confederation's Black Flag fleet was supposed to have helped the Red Flag fleet during this battle, but they were a no-show because they had defected to the Imperial Chinese government in exchange for amnesty. So just like in the Roman Empire, things got too big, and the cracks were starting to show in Zheng Shi's empire. So at the height of her power in April 1810, Zheng Shi made a bold maneuver and agreed to retire. She supposedly went into Canton and met the Governor General at his home. She was unarmed and accompanied by a delegation of women and children, family members of pirates. The terms of the surrender were as follows. The pirates would surrender their junks and weapons, and in exchange they could keep their ill-gotten plunder. Those who were willing could join the army or navy. Zhang Baozi himself became a lieutenant and was allowed to keep a personal fleet of 20 junks, supposedly for trading salt. Zheng Shi was made a lady and had her mother-son relationship with Zhang Baozi annulled so the two could be formally married as well. History was made on April 20th, 1810. Of the more than 17,000 pirates who formally surrendered, only like 60 were banished for 2 years, 150 were permanently exiled, and only 120 were executed. So, this like tiny 2% of all the pirates ultimately got punished. Uh, they either did some really terrible things, or maybe Zheng Shi had it out for them and sold them out. We really don't know. So at this point, you're probably wondering how it all ended for this lawless couple turned law-abiding citizens. Well, Zheng Shi and Zhang Baozi did get married. They settled in Canton where they had a son and probably a daughter as well. Zhang Baozi became a colonel and died at the age of 36 in 1822. Zheng Shi herself enjoyed her newfound title and wealth and used it to run a highly profitable gambling house. She lived well into her 60s and died in 1844 surrounded by her family. So, not bad for a pirate who usually meets their end at the end of a noose. She manages to die of old age. And so that is why she is the most successful pirate of all time. She is a true villain and queen of the high seas, Zheng Shi. I hope you enjoyed learning about her as much as I did. I included some of my reference materials below in the video description in case you want to read more about her yourself. There's also this really great maritime museum in Hong Kong that had an exhibit about terror on the high seas and pacifying the South China Sea, which is really worth checking out. Just a final word. I really hope to make more of these videos as I progress in my artwork, so please let me know if you have any feedback, corrections, or even ideas for future videos, things that you want to learn about and would be interesting to research and investigate. So just leave a comment below, and I promise to read and respond as soon as I can. So thanks for watching.